Hey, folks, welcome to JamesPod. Today, I have a very interesting guest, a good friend of mine, Sam Shirazi. Um, the main reason I wanted to start this podcast was really to talk about issues that impact Northern Virginia. Obviously, elections have a big impact locally, statewide, and nationally. The reason I brought Sam on is he's got a very interesting hobby, but he also started a very interesting podcast. It's called Federal Fallout. And if you don't listen to it already and you're interested in Virginia politics, absolutely huge recommendation. I'll put a link to the show notes, but it's on Apple Podcasts and all that. And Sam, you don't have a YouTube channel, do you?
No, I only do audio. I haven't gotten to the video, but it's
Okay.
nice to see you in person and see the video.
Yeah, well, I would recommend with such a strong beard, people want to see that face, man. So I would absolutely recommend coming on to YouTube. So Sam, first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll talk about the podcast in a second, but tell us a little about yourself. How'd you get in Virginia politics and where you're from, that kind of stuff. So.
Sure. So I actually grew up in LA and I decided to go to the University of Virginia for college. And I really went at the right time because I was interested in politics even back then. So I came to Virginia in 2006, really the time when it was shifting from being a red state to a purple state. And now maybe it's a light blue state. So got to see the Jim Webb campaign in 2006. I worked at the University of Virginia as a volunteer for the Obama campaign in 2008. Got to see that campaign, which was an amazing campaign. And then, off and on, I was engaged in Virginia politics because, I had stuff going on, career, family. And then 2021, actually, because of the redistricting commission was one of the main reasons I got re-engaged in politics. And I saw your work on the redistricting commission. And honestly, I thought you were one of the commissioners who was really doing a good job trying to represent the people of Virginia. And anyways, so that was when I really got re-engaged. Started posting on social media, going on podcasts, and ever since then, I've been doing it, and people have found it interesting. So I've just kept with it.
Yeah, and I will tell you what I really like about your podcast. First of all, it's and I know Chaz and other folks have more technical resources. Yours, for me, maybe it's just because it's audio format, it's just been really easy for me to kind of relate to. I also do like. I know you work for Obama, but I do like the fact that it's not really partisan tilting. I'm sure people would say otherwise if they're coming from the other side of the aisle, but I do like your objective nature. And I think it's just easy to hear you talking about it. So again, just another plug-in for your podcast. So thank you for what you're doing. Okay. Why is it called Federal Fallout?
Yeah, so I appreciate the kind words about the podcast. Yeah, so what I envisioned it to be nonpartisan and really informative for the average person who might be interested in politics but isn't living and breathing Virginia politics. And obviously this year we have the election. It's an important election. When I saw what was going on in DC at the beginning of the year, in my mind, it had to have an impact on Virginia because there's so much federal influence in both the jobs and just the nature of Virginia tied to the military. It's not just Northern Virginia. For example, Hampton Roads has a strong military culture. So I figured what's going on in DC is going to impact the Virginia elections. So called it Federal Fallout. Not every episode is exploring what's going on in DC, but in the background, the theme of the podcast is what's going on in DC is going to impact the Virginia elections. And, obviously I have to give an objective assessment of where things are. And I think overall, most people think, and the data so far is showing that it's going to be helping the Virginia Democrats this year in the elections in terms of probably right now they're on track to win the elections, although we'll see what ends up happening in November.
So obviously Democrats are honing in on what DOJ has done and doing and the cuts to the federal workforce. I wanted to take a second because I know that the Republicans candidate for governor made a statement recently on CNN about it. So I'm going to pull this up real quick. Just wanted to get your thoughts on it. So give me just a second. So this is the candidate for Republican Party for Virginia, Winsome Earl Sears, and this is what she had to say about whether or not the job cuts are affecting Virginia.
This is a big issue in Virginia. This has to do with the hundreds of thousands of federal workers, including many who have lost their jobs under DOGE and the Trump administration. I'm wondering, has the president's push to purge the federal workforce, has that been good for Virginia?
You know, I'm glad you asked this question because your side, I'm assuming your side of the aisle, they keep talking about this. And you know what we've done in Virginia? We've created the 250,000 jobs I'm trying to get to talk about that you wanted to talk about something else.
But what about the jobs that have been, do you support what they've done?
I'm trying to answer the question now. I'm trying to answer the question.
Please do.
Manu.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So just 3 days ago, well, we had to send a letter to the Fairfax County chairman to say there was a company that was going to create 800 high-paying jobs, averaging 150,000, that would have offset federal jobs that you're talking about being lost. And yet, you know what, the Democrats who are in authority there, they said no. So it's which one do you want? You want to talk about jobs that are being lost when we can continue to create jobs?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just curious if you supported the I was just curious if you supported the president's purge of the federal workforce, but I didn't hear an answer to that.
Just have a talking point so that their candidate, Abigail Spanberger, can win.
No, I just want to know if you supported I was curious if you supported the president's purge of the federal workforce. That's all. I didn't get a clear answer on that. But I do want to turn to an issue that is also important to a lot of voters.
I'm giving you a clear answer, but you don't want to hear my clear answer because it's common sense.
So do you support the president's purge of the federal workforce? Yes or no?
Oh, okay. If this is the way you want to go, then go ahead. But I'm just not going to participate.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about.
So I saw that, and it was a little longer as we're watching it together. Hopefully, it was useful for the viewers, and I know you've seen it. What's your thoughts on? I mean, I think that in a lot of ways encapsulates kind of where this race is going, or at least in my view, my biased view. What's your thoughts on her response, on Sears' response?
Yeah, so I posted about this. I think the DOGE effect and the federal job cuts have been the hardest issue for the Virginia GOP this year because they can't really take a position one way or the other. And if you think about it, they can't fully embrace it and say, oh, yeah, it's great all these federal workers are getting fired because, Virginia, a lot of people know federal employees. They can't fully embrace it. They can't fully disown it and say, no, they shouldn't be firing federal workers. And so that you get these non-answers or this middle ground, or they don't want to talk about it, or they talk about the private sector. So they never really answer the question. And typically in politics, the side that has the clearer position usually ends up winning that issue. So if you think about the Democratic position, there shouldn't be these federal job cuts, or at least they should be going about it in a way that makes sense, as opposed to just randomly firing people at certain times. And so overall, I mean, I think it's one of the things that is hurting the Virginia GOP this year. And it just doesn't look great if you're a voter. You're trying to figure out, what is the GOP position on the DOGE federal job cuts in Virginia? I think the best I can understand is they said these people can just find jobs in the private sector. But again, that is not a super clear answer to a question. And you saw the reporter ask yes or no, and she just couldn't answer it because she can't say yes and she can't say no.
Well, and it's interesting. So, and I'm an avid listener of your podcast. Oftentimes I'll text you afterwards when interesting conversations. And I know you recently had Tim Anderson on. He's candidate for House of Delegates, District 97. And I think he was making the same arguments that Sears, I think, tried to make, that essentially once these job cuts started happening, Youngkin produced a website. I think it's called Virginia Has Jobs or something to that effect. And essentially to offset those, because their position is, look, we have private jobs here in Virginia. The federal workforce is bloated. Why don't you come here and work in Virginia in the public sector and the private sector? Have you seen any evidence or have you heard anybody saying, you know what, I've been able to navigate that realm. I found that productive. I found that website useful.
So in terms of the specific website, I have not heard anyone go to that website. I mean, I think most people, if you're trying to find a job, you go to either your network or you go to LinkedIn or you go to the normal places. I don't think anyone's really specifically going to a Virginia State website, dying to look for a job. I mean, certainly some of the people who have either, decided to move on from the federal government or have actually been laid off from the federal government, I'm sure they're finding jobs because people have to pay bills, they're willing to go to other places. The reality is, and I think the Democratic nominee Abigail Spanberger has talked about this, a lot of these people came to Virginia or came to the DC area because they wanted to work for the federal government. They believe in public service. They believe in what they're doing. And so I think just saying, well, you can just go to the private sector misses the point about why people work for the federal government. And oftentimes they're taking a pay cut in terms of what they could be making in the private sector. And, often this is framed as a Northern Virginia issue, but I think people in Hampton Roads, even though they work they're in the military side of things, they understand public service. They understand wanting to work for the federal government in the military side of things. And so while I get I get what the Republicans are trying to do, and that's what they have, what else are you going to say? In a state like Virginia, Commonwealth like Virginia, where people really are tied to the federal government, not just because they want a job and want a paycheck, but because they believe in public service, I think it's a tough sell in Virginia to kind of just say, oh, go to the private sector, because this isn't like, New York with Wall Street, where everyone's just super pro business. I mean, a lot of people's identity, even if you're Republican leading and you're a military voter, is tied up with the federal government and working for the federal government.
Yeah, and look, this question may be an unfair one. It's beyond more kind of analytical. It's more kind of opinion, I think. Why is it not possible for the Republican Party, Tim Anderson specifically, but also Sears at more of a general level, why can't they make the argument that, look, we agree, because obviously Trump is who they are, but we agree with most of what Trump has done, but we believe that Doge was implemented in a haphazard way. We believe that while we need serious immigration reform and, you need to be more efficient with the federal government, you can't do it this way. It was implemented badly. Why don't you think that Republicans go a little bit further to not even necessarily distance themselves from Trump, but to be more nuanced about that, to make this argument easier for them?
So I think this is an issue that both sides have, and I hate to sue the both sides things, although I think it is worse for the Republican side. I mean, you have basically two groups of voters. You have your base of voters, and then you have the middle undecided type voters. And I think the advantage the Democrats have this year is their base is going to be fired up and angry and going to show up no matter what. And so you see with Spanberger, she's able to maybe try to cater more towards the middle. The problem the Republicans have, and this is always a problem in these off-year elections when you're the party in the White House, your base needs to show up. And so your base, a lot of them support what Doge is doing. And so if you say, well, Doge or the federal firings didn't go well, or they could have been done better, I mean, your base is going to get upset at that. And so if your base, as a Republican politician, you have to think, I need to say something that's going to keep my base happy, but I also have to try to appeal to the middle. And I think that's the huge challenge. Some issues are easier than others to do that. I think the problem with this is the type of issue where I think their base is very much in support of what's going on with Trump. And so you can't really distance yourself too much from him, because you'll upset the base. And, it's one of those things where you're a politician, some issues are good for you, some issues are bad for you, and you're trying to figure out how to do each issue. And, Spanberger has this issue too with certain policies, but ultimately I think the fact that the Doge cuts are such a big deal in Virginia, that's why it's so hard for them to navigate. And I agree with you. I mean, I think it makes sense to try to critique it. I've heard some people, one way of doing it would be make Musk the bad guy, because he's kind of fallen out with Republicans now and said, oh, this is all Musk's fault. And like, basically Trump did everything right, but Musk messed it up. I'm actually surprised they haven't done that. I think that's probably the smartest political angle if you're trying to, walk that tightrope.
Well, I wonder if they're concerned about Musk hitting back, but I suspect, Musk probably does not care about what a governor's race is saying about him. He's focused on what's coming out of Truth Social or whatever it is at this point. I will say though, looking at the both sides, because and I know you kind of caveat a little bit, but I think there are issues with on the Democratic side that we take issue with that I think openly, Spanberger, right to work. I think there's some open divide there where I think she's kind of trying to walk the aisle, but I think there are people in the Democratic Party willing to openly say, look, we need to be more progressive about that. I will tell you, I can anticipate, and look, I am 100% behind Spanberger, but I have a feeling that I'm gonna, and folks like me are gonna hope that she's more progressive that she ends up being, which is fair. I mean, I would rather her win the election, but I think we can go further there. Immigration, for instance, I think that's a good point that I wish at the federal, and again, this is a little bit tangent, but had, I think, Harris been a bit more vocal about, and maybe quote distance herself from Biden a little bit, maybe there could have been something there. Because I do think that we all obviously are seeing what's happened with immigration and ICE. Nobody agrees with this, or I think a lot of Republicans have an issue, but I think we could have been more nuanced on how we looked at it. But that being said, again, I'm just standing up for my own party. I don't think it's the same, but it is what it is. Again, a national issue. You did a little emergency or a supplemental, no, bonus podcast. That's what you call them, bonus podcast about the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What's your thoughts? First of all, just tell us what's happening there, what Trump did, and how it impacts Virginia. And the ultimate question I'm going to be asking you is, how are we going to be looking at these job reports going forward, especially in considering federal fallout?
Right. So just a quick recap. On Friday, the jobs numbers came out, which this is a monthly report, and usually it creates a little bit of a news cycle, but it's not like the biggest thing in the world. I think the important thing from this last jobs report, there was some revisions to previous months. And so overall, it painted kind of not a great picture about the job market, and not that many jobs are being created. President Trump didn't like that. And so he decided to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the agency that puts out these numbers. I think there's a couple things going on. One, there's this macro debate about the economy. I mean, the party in the White House always tries to say, economy's great, everything's fine. And then the party out of the White House tends to say the economy's not doing well. I mean, these jobs reports are one of the objective numbers we have to say, okay, which side is right? And I think future reports, I mean, who knows? But theoretically, if you are the current head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I mean, you know the president is going to look at the number and that your job is on the line. I mean, maybe you're the type of person who just doesn't care. Okay, if he fires me, he fires me. It's not the end of the world. Or you might be the type of person that thinks, I need to keep my job, so I'm going to put out a number that I think the president's going to like. And, there are private companies that do similar types of reports that, states look at these numbers. So while I think ultimately the problem that the Republicans are going to have is the economy is the economy. And so you can try to spin it. You can try to say things are great. But if people are losing their jobs, or if people are going to the supermarket and are feeling high prices, it's gonna come back to bite you. And I think the Democrats unfortunately learned this the hard way when they looked at the macroeconomic numbers. They're saying, look, unemployment's low, inflation has come down, everything's fine. But the voters were saying, like, look, we were hit with 2 years of inflation and we just can't take these prices anymore. And they gave Donald Trump a chance. The problem that the Republicans have now is Trump with these tariffs and other policies. I mean, inflation has started to tick up again. I mean, we'll see if this is a long-term trend, but I think, the economy is one of those things you really can't spin your way out of it. I mean, people feel the economy. Every time you go to the grocery store, you see the prices. You cannot wish away high prices. I think Democrats learned that the hard way, and I think the Republicans might end up learning it the hard way as well.
And maybe another question I have about the labor statistics, and I appreciate that. I think that's absolutely right. But I guess part of the reason I'm asking that is I keep seeing Trump doing things that seem to be undermining kind of fundamental ways in which we know if we have a working democracy, right? So are you concerned by this change that it may have a real impact on the ability for the average voter, Republican or Democrat, to understand objectively what the economy is doing? Or is it really just, a small talking point that they have monthly, and it's not a big deal?
I think one thing to keep in mind, and again, this is one of the lessons from 2024, is you have to take the average voter or the average person as opposed to the really highly engaged voter. And even before all this stuff with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I mean, they would do surveys and say, what do you think the unemployment rate was in 2024? And most people would say like 10%. I mean, people just most people are not looking at 8:30 on a Friday. What is the unemployment rate that the jobs report? I mean, and people are kind of going off vibes, how they feel things are going. And then also, I mean, the reality is the media environment's changed. People get their information from different places. They get them from this podcast. They get them from right-wing podcasts. And so those numbers are always going to be not always reported to people. And so I think while I appreciate that there is concern about these things, I think the reality is a lot of voters weren't necessarily paying attention to this before. And, unfortunately, this is going to be one of those things that's going to be partisan. So even before these changes, Republicans, when there was a Democratic president, would say, oh, I don't believe the numbers. Now, even before these changes, a lot of Democrats would say, oh, I don't believe the numbers when they were good for Trump. And now that they're bad for Trump, we're saying, yeah, these numbers are accurate. So I think partisanship has gone through everything. And so it's just the reality of where we are. So, I think overall, in terms of getting an accurate number, I think this somewhat undermines things, but I think that has been eroding for a long time in terms of where people are getting information.
Yeah. And one thing that I noticed in one of your recent podcasts is I think you referenced Bill Clinton's campaign or one of his advisors' campaign. It's about the economy stupid. One question I want to have in mind, and maybe you could address it now, is it that simple? Is all of these cultural issues a distraction from Democrats winning elections? Should we be focused purely on the economy, or what kind of mix would you suggest?
I think one thing that was talked about a lot in 2024 was the difference between high propensity voters and low propensity voters. So low propensity voters are the voters who might not always show up, typically more so on the presidential side. And then there's the high propensity voters who always show up. High propensity voters are more democratic these days, and they tend to focus on things such as democracy or more abstract concepts. Whereas the low propensity voter, which Trump did a really good job reaching those voters, they care a lot more about the economy because they tend to be lower income, less educated. And so I think it's important for the Democrats to realize, your donors might care about certain things, your hardcore base might care about certain things, but the average voter who's maybe making $40,000 a year, is trying to get by, is not watching, the news every night. It's not their number one concern, what's going on in DC and what's this bill and that bill. They're just trying to pay the bills. Those people might have a different concern. And you can't forget those people, because traditionally the base of the Democratic Party has been working class people. I still think there are a lot of working class people, particularly non-white working class people in the Democratic Party. But increasingly, the donor class, the people who kind of drive some of these conversations, are more wealthier, college-educated voters. And so it's important for the Democrats not to lose track. There are important issues happening. There's important things we want to focus on. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, they're just trying to make ends meet. They're trying to pay the rent. They're trying to get their kids to school. And so it's important not to forget that aspect of politics as well.
That's a good. I appreciate that. And I was just thinking about an interview you had with the Cardinal editor, Yancey, I believe his name
Dwayne
is.
Yancey.
You asked him about the Medicaid cuts and how that's impacting particularly voters in Southwest Virginia and the South Side. But generally speaking, do you think the Democrats' message that, hey, look, Medicaid is going to be cut, it's going to impact you, do you think that's going to have a real impact for the elections coming up in November, or is it just too early for that to even be seen?
I think it's a little bit early to be seen. I think that's part of the Republican strategy, is they put the cuts to Medicaid a little bit later on, even after the midterms. I do think it's important for Democrats to not get super disillusioned with some parts of the country. So you'll see things like Southwest Virginia. It's like, it doesn't matter what we do. Those people will always vote for the Republicans. And, we can emphasize this or that, but they're just kind of Republicans now. Obviously what Democrats, for example, with Southwest Virginia are never going to win Southwest Virginia anytime soon. But margins matter. And I think it also just makes a difference when you try to go and explain what these bills are doing. Now, it's hard. There's a media environment. There's people who are not super engaged in politics. But I do think it's important to try to at least touch on those concerns, because if they hear a Democrat coming into, let's say, Southwest Virginia, and you talk about rural hospitals, Medicaid, cuts to food stamps, I mean, if that's what they're hearing from the Democratic Party, they might not necessarily vote for that person, but they understand, okay, they're caring about some of these issues we care about. Because a lot of these people, what they hear, what their media environment is telling them is all the Democrats care about is trans issues and abortion and going after Trump. And that's the only thing they care about. They don't care about you, and they care about immigrants, and they don't care about Americans. And that's kind of the message that these people get. But if you see a Democrat come to your county and say, you know, I'm worried about this rural hospital, it might get closed, people might think for a second, oh, maybe the Democrats are not exactly what I thought they were.
You know, and I don't know if I ever told you this. I actually grew up in Buchanan County, so Grundy, Virginia.
I think I knew that, yeah.
Yeah. So my elementary school was Grundy, Virginia, PV Dennis Elementary, and I started off with Grundy High School, and then we ended up moving. But and now my current middle school is the Appalachian School of Law. My dad was a physician out there, and he worked at Buchanan General Hospital. So for what it's worth, for anybody watching this, I do think that an effort made by our elected officials to actually put boots on the ground. And look, I know the drive is a long drive. I get it. But, you know, if you're going to do the job, I think it makes a lot of sense to just be seen there. Because first of all, for what all they're painted as on TV, especially in the liberal media, I think most folks, Southwest Virginia, Grundy, same as here, they're just trying to live their lives, and they're just trying to get along. And I think if you're actually meeting people face to face and you actually have a discussion with them, they may not end up agreeing with you. In fact, I don't think they'll ultimately be voting Democrat anytime soon. But the fact that we're even bringing up issues like Medicaid is a huge issue in that area. Drug addiction is a huge issue in that area. And so I think that where we oftentimes kind of get lost in, you know, and believe me, trans rights is important. I think that minority rights are important, but I do think framing it in an economic format to where everybody can understand that, but also going and being seen there is so important. So anybody listening to this that has some power, that's elected, it's a nice area. There's cool mountains if you want to go on a hike, go on some camping, for what it's worth, just from a old Grundy boy. But anyway, let's talk about the statewide elections. Governorship, lieutenant governor, and attorney general are up for election November. All House districts as well, right?
Right.
Just
that's right.
Yeah. I think everybody sort of understands what the governor does. Can you give us a little idea of what the lieutenant governor spot is, and maybe a little bit about the attorney general for non-lawyers? What are those positions? Why are they important?
Sure. So I think lieutenant governor, I mean, most people think of it as kind of like the vice president. Like if something happens as a governor, they step in. That's important. But I do think they, more so than the vice president, play an important part in overseeing the Virginia Senate. They can break ties in the Virginia Senate, which is a 40-seat body. But they also just generally are the presiding officer of the Virginia Senate. And you often see the lieutenant governor in the Virginia Senate guiding debate, making calls. So I do think while most people focus on the kind of being number two aspect of lieutenant governor, it does play an important role in the Virginia Senate. And I did want to spend a time emphasizing the attorney general race, because people, they often think about Virginia, they think about the governor's race. And the governor's race is important, no doubt. But in terms of what's going on in D.C., the attorney general in many ways plays an more important role, because attorney generals have the ability to sue the current administration. When the current incumbent Republican attorney general, Jason Miyares, was facing the Biden administration, he would often sue the Biden administration. He joined lawsuits against the Biden administration. To my knowledge, he has not joined any lawsuit against the Trump administration. And obviously, if the Democratic nominee, Jay Jones, wins the attorney general race, he will start joining lawsuits and being more active on that front. And it's important because some of these lawsuits, especially now with certain Supreme Court decisions, if you are not a party to the lawsuit, if the judge does something, for example, an injunction, which means tells the federal government you can't do this, if you are not a party to that lawsuit, that injunction does not apply to that state. And so there have been examples where other blue states with Democratic attorney generals have been able to get certain things stopped because the attorney generals in those states have sued the Trump administration, whereas Virginia, we have not gotten that action. And so I think, yes, governor's race is important, gets most of the attention. I do think both the LG and attorney general races are also important, and AG, especially given how much of the pushback Democrats have done to the Trump administration has come through the legal process.
And it's interesting. First of all, I'm most I mean, I think you're a lawyer as well. We're most fascinated just from a technical standpoint from the Attorney General. It's he or she is the lawyer for the Commonwealth of Virginia, um, holding the biggest law firm in Virginia, the Attorney General's office. But this race is interesting from a reality TV standpoint. I mean, you see the strange behavior between Sears, Reed, and Mieres. Talk a little bit for folks that are not aware. Talk a little about the oddities in their in that race so far, and some of the complications between them, just as I guess people.
Yeah, I'll talk about the the Winsome Earl Sears Mieres aspect first, because I think that often gets overshadowed by everything that happened with John Reed. So I think both of them wanted here for governor. For various reasons, Mieres decided to give Earl Sears the opportunity, and he ran for re-election. But I do think behind the scenes, there's a little bit of tension there, just because when, there was this shadow primary for a while, and there was clearly stuff going on behind the scenes. So I don't think they're super close necessarily. And then you have John Reed in the middle, and John Reed is just his own personality. He's doing his own thing. He is not necessarily having some sort of talking points that the Republicans are sending out around. And there was this whole controversy earlier in the year where Glenn Youngkin asked him to drop out of the ticket. I don't know what was really driving that. It's possible Winsome Earl Sears was also behind that because she didn't want to directly ask for it, so she asked Youngkin to do it. But clearly, Winsome Earl Sears and John Reed have some tension. They've only done one event together, and publicly they're going to say that yes, we are unified and you should support the Republican ticket. But I do think behind the scenes there's some tension, and anytime you have that drama, it's not going to be great in terms of running a coordinated campaign, because just the technical aspect of campaigns. I mean, there's literally something called the coordinated campaign, where once the nominees are picked, there's supposed to be coordination. There's supposed to be at the higher levels message discipline, and at the lower levels, talking about all three people as a ticket. And I think that has not necessarily been there for the Republicans. Whereas on the Democratic side, my sense is things are pretty unified. So just another thing that Virginia Republicans are dealing with this year, where they already have a lot of problems going on.
Well, and what I found fascinating, Mieres, apparently he is a funding beast. I guess he is outraising, and to be fair, he outraised Jay Jones, but it looks like he also outraised Sears herself. Have you seen any discussion about maybe some Monday morning quarterbacking about who should have been top of the ticket for the Republicans, or are they being pretty tightly lipped about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense of Mieres is the strongest candidate. What if you ran for governor instead of Earl Sears? I mean, that ship has kind of sailed. The reality is, I do think Mieres is going to do the best out of the three. There isn't that much ticket splitting. I talk about this. I think the Republicans are really trying to pin all their hopes on Mieres, and they think maybe he could win, while even if it is, I think that's relatively unlikely. Obviously, he's probably trying to get the best performance he can just for his own sake. I don't know what his future is going to be. I mean, in theory, he could run again for governor in 2029. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. But the reality is, people like you and me know about all this stuff. Most people are just following the governor's race. So I think that's the challenge the Republicans are going to have, is the attorney general race is important, but most people just vote straight ticket. And I just don't see Mieres being able to outrun Earl Sears by that much at the top of the ticket, even though he has the money. Money helps. You're going to run some ads, but most people are not going to be splitting their tickets. So I think that's the challenge Mieres has.
Yeah, and from a technical standpoint, it looks like he has like $7 million on hand, whereas like Jay Jones only has like 1.5 or something. Is that a reflection of Mieres just waiting to spend money? What's going on there, and how does the money flow in a campaign like that?
Yeah, so I posted about this because there was an article about ticket splitting. And I think one thing to keep in mind with the attorney general race is Jay Jones just came out of a primary that was very competitive at the end.
Sure.
He had to spend a lot of money running ads. And while, we often just look at the numbers and say, oh, well, he doesn't have that much money left. I mean, he didn't get nothing out of that. Those ads were running across Virginia. They were reaching Republicans, Independents, Democrats, because that's how it works. And for the most part, Jay himself was running positive ads, like about his bio. So it definitely helped his name ID. I don't think it was like lighting all that money on fire because it's going to help him for the general election. So it's important to keep in mind that Jay has so far has been spending more than Miyares. I mean, Miyares is starting to spend his money, but just objectively, Jay Jones has spent more than Miyares so far this year in Virginia. And I'm sure he's starting to fundraise more. Typically, when you become the nominee, there's some donors who are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the nominee. So I think he'll get some money out of that. And yeah, I mean, obviously it helps Miyares if he has a little bit more money. But if at the top of the ticket, Spanberger has like 10 million more than Sears, and she's going to be spending that in the fall, at some point, I mean, the net Democratic spending is going to be more than the net Republican spending. And, that specific race, again, how many people are really going to split their tickets? My theory is it's going to be 2 to 3%. On the best possible scenario, it's going to be 5% for Miyares. And, if Spanberger is winning by more than 5%, it just doesn't really matter how much Miyares is spending.
One of the themes that we hear nowadays is, at least in the federal level, is like, sure, money matters, but it's not everything. I mean, you saw Musk spend all the money, and I forgot what state it was, to try to win the Supreme Court election. Do you think at the state level, the importance of money is still as important as it used to be, or is that starting to see a dampening effect as you go down to local races, state and local races?
I think money is one of those things where you need a certain amount to be able to be competitive. You cannot be raising, hundreds of dollars, which some of these House of Delegates candidates on the Republican side have raised a few $100s. I mean, that is not going to work. You need a minimum amount to run a competent campaign. You need a minimum amount to run some ads so people know who you are. They know your name ID. But I think one thing Democrats have to start learning, and frankly, Donald Trump did this well in 2024, and I think Mamdani in New York did it well this year. You can get so much free social media presence, just viral videos, viral posts, trying to just get your content in front of people's eyeballs for free. And so while, yes, it's important to fundraise, it's important to do traditional ads, I mean, it doesn't cost you a whole lot to put out a video, try to reach people that way. And so while, I think the Democrats, it's important to do the traditional stuff, I think one thing they can learn from 2024 and do a better job at is trying to reach more voters through viral videos, through free advertisement, basically. And it's just something that can overcome some of the traditional money advantage that maybe Republicans had through these super PACs and other ways. And you saw that with Trump. I mean, Trump didn't raise as much as Harris raised, but he, I would say, probably reached more people just through all this, podcasts and all the stuff he did. So it's an important lesson. Money's still important, but it's not everything in an election.
Yeah, and I will say, you're hearing, and obviously I think that the Republicans are going to try to tie every Democrat to Mamdani. Apparently now we're all running for the mayor's race in New York. But I would encourage folks that are interested in politics, interested in running for office, and clearly people are working campaigns here in Virginia, to take some time to watch his content. I mean, whether or not you agree with his policies, I think a lot of it was just authentic discussions with voters in a kind of an entertaining way. And he's an entertaining guy. I mean, he just got a good personality. Again, you don't have to agree with his politics. So I do think it makes a lot of sense to learn where you can. And for what it's worth, also Trump too. I mean, he's a media master. I think we can all agree, unfortunately, on that. So let's talk about some delegate races. And I know that obviously all 100 up for re-election. You have identified some pretty important races. One here in Northern Virginia, best I could tell, House of Delegate race number 30. Talk about that. Tell me about what you're seeing there. What do we need to know, and what do you think will be the big issues?
Yeah, so there's a few Republican seats left in Northern Virginia because after Trump won in 2016, there were the Virginia elections in 2017, and that pretty much wiped out most of the Northern Virginia Republicans. There's a few districts left, and House District 30 is interesting because it's in Western Loudoun, traditionally a Republican seat. And I think one of the big questions, again, the name of the podcast was Federal Fallout, is to try to figure out how much of what's going on in DC is going to impact not just the state overall, but these individual races, specifically races in Northern Virginia and other parts of Virginia where very tied to the federal government. So this district has a decent amount of federal workers, I imagine, has a good amount of federal contractors, specifically with the military side of things. And so if we're really seeing a big backlash where voters are just, traditionally they've been Republicans, but they just say like, look, my pocketbook has been hurt by this. I cannot keep doing this. I think it'll be an interesting race. And the Democrat running, John McAuliffe, younger guy, has raised a decent amount of money. So I think in a lot of these districts, Democrats have gotten good candidates because obviously when the environment looks better for you, you're going to be able to recruit better candidates. They got younger candidates in many of these districts. So I think there's an opportunity, if there really is a blue wave, for a new generation of leadership to be coming up in Virginia. And that's often what happens when you have these wave elections. You kind of get to replenish the ranks with some of these people. So we'll see if that happens in House District 30 in Western Loudoun.
Yeah, and John McAuliffe's running against, I don't know if it's Jerry or Gary Higgins. Is it? How do you pronounce his first name?
Gary.
Higgins. It's
Gary
interesting
Higgins.
spelling it. Maybe Geary, I believe. What is he doing to weave that needle? Or is he going full on Trump, or what is his policy positions?
Yeah, I mean, Higgins is an interesting guy in the sense of he's only been a delegate since a couple years ago, but he's been around Loudoun a long time. I think he was on the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors. I think he's generally known for being more of a right-wing type guy. I don't think he's really trying to really moderate at all. In some of these races, these Republicans are just going to run their race, hope their base shows up, and, we'll see. I think it worked for him in 2023, even though he got a serious challenger or a serious Democrat running against him. I think the thing that might be hard for these Republicans is if you have these traditionally Republican voters who either personally have been affected or they just don't like what they're seeing in DC start turning on the Republicans, that is where they could really be in a danger zone. And, I think there have been there are some Republican delegates who are more moderate, I would say, or at least try to present themselves as more moderate. But Higgins is definitely one that just, he's running his race, and he's gonna find out the chips will fall where they will in November.
And just out of curiosity, I'm trying to see how far east does District 30 go? Does it go all the way to Leesburg?
It actually doesn't include Leesburg. It's past Leesburg, so it's really I think it's called like the Loudoun Valley. So it's right before the Shenandoah Valley starts, and it's it's an interesting area. So traditionally, it's been a more rural area, more Republican area. I think there's been increasing suburbanization, particularly in the little knob that you see on the screen poking out of the district. And it also has a decent amount of, exactly, more suburbanization, more houses being built there. It also has like a decent amount of wealthier people. If people go out for wineries and stuff, it's winery country, horse country, interesting type district. But then you also have, more working class rural people who tend to be more Republican. So I think it's going to be tight. It's one of those districts. I think Chaz Nuttycombe had his projection. He said it's basically going to be, 50-50 coin flip who's going to win it. And, we'll see if it's one of those districts where the federal fallout is what makes the difference in terms of maybe giving the Democrats the pickup in this seat.
Yeah, and by the way, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube, I pulled up VPAP. If you don't know what VPAP is, vpap.org is an amazing resource for Virginia politics. You can find your local representative there, but you can also find super interesting issues. They created maps post 2021 redistricting, so that's what I'm looking at here. I'll put it in the show notes, but just looking here, and the reason I ask is, I go to Loudoun and Leesburg all the time for court. I was a public defender out there. So, and people in Northern Virginia know it well. As you mentioned, they go out for wine country and all that kind of stuff. So it's just interesting to see where that line is drawn. And I think you're right that, the bluishness is going further left, which again, for us Democrats or for me, Democrat, that's a good thing. I haven't read much about District 21. It's here saying it's purple. Do you know a whole lot about that district?
So that's the district where I was kind of earlier making fun of the Republican candidate. So he literally in the last reporting quarter, raised $150. Literally he raised $150. And I think that district.
Sorry,
so the Democrat is incumbent Josh Thomas. And, the Republican candidate, honestly, I think his name slips my mind because, to be honest, he is just not really being that serious of a candidate. And I think that district shows the Republican problems because it was the closest district in terms of the Democratic seat in 2023, and it was the closest Democratic held seat in 2024 in terms of the Harris margin.
Mm.
But the Republican candidate raised $150, and
Well,
Josh Thomas is a strong incumbent.
Yeah, I guess the fact that you can't remember his name probably proves that money does matter in politics still. You mentioned that there was other Northern Virginia districts that were former Republican or at least Republican or leaning that way. Is there any other Northern Virginia districts we should be looking at as far as interesting races?
Yeah, so there's two. There's House District 22, which is in Middle Prince William County. The Republican incumbent's in Lovejoy, and the Democratic nominee is former delegate Elizabeth Guzman. And that is, I think Harris very slightly carried the district, but again, is a traditionally Republican seat in Middle Prince William, the red one that you see right there. And I think, it's similar story as House District 30. Is there going to be federal fallout? Is that going to cause the Republicans to lose ground in Northern Virginia? And then there's another district in Stafford that is House District 64, I believe, and that is has a Republican incumbent, and the Democratic nominee is Stacey Carroll. So, I think that's showing you the 2021 number. I wouldn't focus too much on 2021 because I just thought that was like.
Sorry, I was just using it as a reference.
No. And just for people's context, I think Trump won that district by about 2 points. And I think it's going to be curious to think about, these districts. Typically, Republicans do better in the state elections than in the presidential election. So when you see a Trump +2 district, traditionally you would think, okay, that'd be hard for the Democrats to win that district because Democrats do better in federal elections as opposed to the state elections. But I do think, again, federal fallout, that district, Middle Stafford, a lot of federal employees, people have impacted. Does it get to the point where some Trump voters are starting to flip? Because if you start seeing Trump people vote for the Democrats in 2025, I mean, that's real danger zone for the Republicans. And that's where these three districts in Northern Virginia could flip, because it's not just like Democrats are getting out their base. They're starting to flip people. And that's like really, anytime you start flipping people, that's where you get into landslide or blue wave territory.
Okay. Let's talk about, we'll move away from Northern Virginia, House District 97. And I know you had Tim Anderson on. Tell me a little about him versus Michael Fagans, and what should we be looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, I had Tim Anderson on. He's a Republican. It was interesting to have him and get his perspective. I mean, he's certainly like a very competent guy. He's a lawyer. He speaks well. I think he's trying to present himself as somewhat more of a moderate Republican. Traditionally that would be working well in Virginia Beach. I think the problem he's going to have, and we'll see if he's able to overcome it, is just the environment. And is this the year where he might be able to win a district like that, especially when Hampton Roads has a little bit of a different type of impact, but still the military is probably feeling some impact by what's going on in DC. And I think, he won originally in 2021 during the red wave when Youngkin came in. I think if there's a red wave this year, he's going to win. It's not looking like there's going to be a red wave. And I think that's the challenge he's going to face. But I would say of the Republicans challenging an incumbent Democrat, he's probably the most competent one. And we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if it's still relatively close, even if Michael Fagans is able to hold it out, the incumbent Democrat.
Yeah, I will tell you, you got me interested in him. So I started following him on social media, and he is a prolific poster. He speaks, especially on your podcast. I was like, oh, this sounds pretty moderate. And then I'm watching his feed and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. There goes.
But I will say the fact that he has that social media and he came on my podcast, again, it's getting all this free media. Like, you may not agree with everything he's saying, but it's getting your message out in front of people. I think that's smart. Frankly, I think more candidates on both sides should be doing that. But again, I think the environment is the main problem he's going to be facing.
Yeah. And not that he's going to watch this, but if he does, I'm glad he went on. And I think I would encourage Democratic candidates to be on social media, on podcasts, so long as it's not somebody that's just like so off the rails that it's, but if you have legitimate opportunity on both sides, you should be getting your voice out. If nothing else, to be challenged on your positions and be able to hold your arguments better for when you're challenged when it matters. Because a lot of times these social media, if you're on a right-wing podcast, they're probably not voting for you anyway. So, I'm glad he did that, and he was making some good technical arguments. That I was like, oh, that's interesting way to put it. I could tell he's probably a good litigator. So for what that's worth. So anyway, House Delegates 41. And again, this is the one you talked to Dwayne Yancey on, but tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, this one, and, I know if there's time, we'll get into redistricting. This is the one where I think the special masters, when they drew the lines in Virginia, I don't know what they were thinking. So this district, frankly, should be Democratic leaning because you have Montgomery County in Southwest Virginia. The district includes Blacksburg, which is where Virginia Tech is located, but it doesn't include any of the other towns around Blacksburg. So there's Christiansburg, which is very close to Blacksburg, and it doesn't include Radford, which is similar to Blacksburg, which is a college town. And it's a pretty crazy district because you have basically the college town of Blacksburg and then some rural areas around it that are super red. And so it's a 50-50 district because Blacksburg's blue, the rural areas are red. I think that was probably done intentionally. The Democrats have a repeat candidate with Lily Franklin. She got really close in 2023. She only lost by 183 votes. She's a younger candidate, I think a really competent candidate. She knows she needs to get out Virginia Tech students to win that race. She's working on that. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, is this district just drawn in a way that is not possible for the Democrats to win? Because I think if there's a year the Democrats are going to win this district, it's probably this year. And so if I had to guess, it's going to be close. And the question just becomes, can Lily Franklin get out enough students to vote in order to win? Or is the district just drawn in that way where there's just too many rural areas? It doesn't matter how many people end up showing up at Virginia Tech that she won't be able to win. Again, it's probably going to take a while to figure out who's going to win on election night and election week because there's same-day registration in Virginia. You have to wait for those. So long story short, very interesting race, really the only competitive race in Southwest Virginia, and I think it's going to come down to the wire.
Yeah, and I should have looked this up. When you're talking about Franklin losing by just a few hundred votes, essentially, that was under the old maps, right? That wasn't the new maps? Or
no, it was the current map. It was the current map.
Okay. So, I mean, I would think that if it's that close, then, it's within an earshot, right? So it's not like it's virtually impossible. I think it's really a possibility, right?
Yeah, I think actually Chaz Nuttycombe has Lily Franklin favored right now. And it's hard for me to know who's favored. I think it's at a minimum a 50-50 district in this environment. So I do think it's going to be super interesting to see who ends up on top. I think the problem Lily Franklin has is college students are notoriously difficult to get out to vote. So, you can't say she's going to win 100% because theoretically, if college students are asleep, they don't show up, she's not going to win. And so it's not like these other districts where you kind of know who's already going to show up. It all comes down to, do the college kids show up? I think for this year, this environment, Spanberger at the top of the ticket, I think she has a better shot than she did in 2023. And as you noted, even in 2023, she only lost by 183 votes.
Mm-hmm. And I feel maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like, especially what's happening with Virginia colleges and the Trump administration actively targeting colleges that, I'm sure kids at Tech have friends at, George Mason and UVA. I would hope that they're more activated this year than previous years, but I guess we just don't know. So, but that's also what makes Virginia politics interesting. There's no real way of knowing until you know. So, I don't know. So that's a good transition, actually, I think, to redistricting. And I'll let you, because part of this thought was to maybe do a cross episode to where you could post it on yours as well and ask me questions. Because at some point you want to ask me questions, but let me ask you this question. And we were talking about it offline, but and you can ask me the same. But did Virginia mess up by passing the redistricting commission, given the context of what's happening? We're seeing Trump essentially asking Texas to find him 5 more seats. Are we getting ready to get an arms race? And should we?
I think it all depends on who you are and your own political beliefs. So if you're a Republican, you are very happy the redistricting amendment passed, because that means the Democrats could not gerrymander Virginia either in 2021 or, if likely, that they're going to win in 2026. So Republicans are happy the redistricting amendment passed. I think if you're a single issue voter or your number one concern is gerrymandering, and like you really hate gerrymandering and you really don't want gerrymandering to happen, I think you're happy the redistricting commission was passed. I think the group of voters that are more tricky are Democrats, because I think are hardcore Democrats who, their number one worry are Trump and the Republicans. The problem with the redistricting commission, if you are in that boat, is it's tied the hands of Virginia Democrats. They can't do anything. So if Texas redistricts, if Indiana redistricts, if Missouri redistricts, if Florida redistricts, like every Republican state redistricts, Virginia just can't do it mid-decade. It's just unconstitutional under the Virginia Constitution. So I think it's a challenge when you are, I would say, the Democrats more so try to hold themselves up as the party of good government and trying to do the right thing and trying to be pro-democracy. And I think sometimes that comes back to bite you, because the people who were Democrats who supported the redistricting amendment, I think they said, look, we can all agree gerrymandering is bad, or at least the Democrats can agree gerrymandering is bad. We have to get this done in Virginia because we control Virginia and that's our opportunity to do it. I think the people against it said, yes, gerrymandering is bad, but we can't unilaterally disarm, because we're basically fighting with one of our hands behind our back, and the Republicans are going to go whole hog on this redistricting thing and the gerrymandering thing. So ultimately, I mean, I am more of the school of it happened. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it now. The one thing I will point out is, theoretically, if Democrats win this year in Virginia, they can start the process to put a new amendment on the ballot in 2028 in Virginia to change the redistricting process. I'm not necessarily advocating for a full repeal of the amendment, but I did want to ask you, I mean, in my opinion, the current redistricting commission, the way it was set up in Virginia, was kind of crazy, and it was bound to fail. And, you don't often talk about it, but you were on the redistricting commission. I would listen to those commission hearings, probably one of the few people in Virginia who actually listened. And, you were, I would describe it as a voice of reason, a voice of rationality, trying to do the right thing. And it just, most of the time, was shut down by the Republicans. And that was what I was seeing. From your vantage point, I mean, what was that experience like? And do you think if it shouldn't be fully repealed, do you think the commission structure should be changed?
Well, so first of all, I went into the commission as a lawyer thinking that this was going to be a really interesting academic discussion of Voting Rights Act, of map drawing, of how do we make sure that one person equals one vote. I went in there, some would say naively, and I will tell you, I was one of the, I think, 3 people that ended up walking out during the sessions of drawing the House maps, and with the intention of breaking quorum, because it was clear to me that the Supreme Court was a better place to draw the maps than the commission itself. As I sit here today, I'm kind of struggling, because when I went in, and I was actually trying to think if I actually voted for the amendment or not. I think I voted for it. Okay. I'm kind of blacking it out because that whole experience was months long. It was during COVID. I just started a law firm. I think my wife was pregnant during part of it, and it was just, and there was a lot of family stuff going on. It was just, thinking about it brings back PTSD a little bit. So I think I voted for it. And I think as I'm going through it, I'm believing in it. But as I'm seeing what's happening, I'm starting less to believe in it. And now on the back end, and I'm seeing what's happening in Texas, what's happening apparently in Ohio as well, and Florida. I do have very serious concerns about, did we make a mistake, which I acknowledge we may have very well made a mistake. Do I think that we can change the structure internally to fix it? I don't know, but a few things that I definitely would want. Number one, and this may not even matter, but I would want to make sure that when we go as citizen commissioners, but also with the delegates, because it was half citizens, half delegates, elected officials, there needs to be an introduction swearing in where you're putting your hand on whatever book you believe or whatever statute or constitution where you're saying that you're going to give it all with the effort of having one person, one vote, and to legitimately end gerrymandering, or however fancy way you want to say that. Because I don't recall us ever swearing to God or anybody else that we would make a true effort. And I think that was foundationally an issue. Again, I don't know that it matters or not. Number two, there needs to be things that the commission is not doing. So working on how things are advertised and getting the word out and marketing for how the commission's actually going to be educating the public. That should be done not by the commission itself, but set up by the government. So that is a unified way of making sure that, flyers are handed out in local libraries, that there's social media advertising and all that kind of stuff. Because we were working on those integral details, which it just seemed like inefficient, and we had no clue what we were doing. There are people that should be hired to do that rather than us being the ones to try to. We even had to try to essentially find marketers or whoever consultants to then hire. I mean, that was taking the eye off the ball. That we had no clue. We need to have a system where there's not not two sets of attorneys and not two sets of map drawers, because as soon as that happened, it was clear to me that this was going to be a litigation exercise and not a let's work together exercise. I think that was the fatal flaw of anything else. As soon as you have two sets of lawyers and two sets of map drawers, it becomes advocacy by each side. And for anybody that cares to go back, I think there's videos on the commission, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I would get into arguments with the Republican lawyer about like what the Voting Rights Act said, rather than I would ask him to kind of educate me. But it was clear to me, and with respect to him, he was a great lawyer, very smart guy, good at his job. But it was clear to me that he had an end in mind and was advocating for that end rather than educating me. I'm not a great lawyer. I'm good enough lawyer to kind of see what's happening. There wasn't all lawyers on that commission, both Republican or Democrat. It's hard to understand what's happening when somebody's advocating rather than, making it sound like they're educating. And that to me is super frustrating. There was also, and I'm not even saying this was all Republicans. I think some Democrats did this as well. There's a requirement that you not have communication with people not on the commission, outside of the commission. And there were very specific rules about that. And it seemed clear to me that there was communications happening that were used to like set structural things. Like for instance, and I ended up liking our chairs that ran the commission. They ended up essentially agreeing, one Republican, one Democrat. I think Greta Harris was on our side, and Babichenko, who's now I think it's CA down in Henrico, was on the Republican side. But it was clear to me they'd already agreed to that before we were even on the commission or actually sitting there. And so are these fatal flaws that mean that you need to get rid of it all the way and do a full repeal? I don't know. I think I'm concerned. But then I back up and then I was listening to a podcast. The Bulwark has really interesting guys. I think they were former Republicans and now they're just anti-Trump. And they were talking about the redistricting commissions and all that. And the concern is if you get rid of redistricting commissions, that you have an arms race, and then you only have the most partisan people winning elections, both Republican and Democrat, on both sides. And the speaker talked about Mike Johnson as an example. He's in a state where he never had to have anybody to run against in both the state legislature and now in Congress or the Senate, Congress. He's never really been in a district where he's actually had to have competition because of redistricting. And that's the reason you can see him going so far to the right, that no matter what he does, he doesn't really have anybody to answer to. And, I don't know if I've answered the question. I think I've probably raised more questions in my own mind than anything, and probably need to speak to my therapist about it. But, I don't know.
Well, first, I think you certainly make a pitch for anyone who wants to be a citizen commissioner in 2031.
No, I'm joking. I'm done.
Well, so I think you raised a lot of interesting points. I agree with all of that based on my observation of the redistricting commission. I think the big question, should it be repealed, should it not be repealed, is kind of irrelevant because I don't think the Democrats have the stomach to do that. And I think two, the voters are never going to go for a full repeal and go back to old school. Sure. This commission was almost or the amendment was almost ratified by 2/3 of the voters. I think the thing that, you as a former commissioner, I think the Democratic legislatures, if they win this year in Virginia, they want to think about 2028. What are you going to do to put something that's a little bit better? Because some of the things you talked about, I mean, you cannot have a commission that has half Republicans, half Democrats, and requires a super majority, and there's no tiebreaker. I mean, that's never going to work. And maybe that's fine. Maybe we just want the Virginia Supreme Court to drop the maps again in 2031. But like, the structure of the commission is just not going to work. I mean, I think the only way I could see it working potentially is if in 2031 people sit down and say, like, look, we're never going to agree to new maps. Let's just tinker with the old maps and change for population. I think that's the only way it could work under the current structure. Otherwise, you have to change it. But the problem, I would say, is Democrats approach this problem for the most part as, we got to fix gerrymandering, we got to fix the problem. How do we do that? There's debates about that. I think Republicans approach this as, how do we maximize our advantage? And I saw that on the redistricting commission, where I think the Democratic commissioners were trying to figure out, how do we come up with a compromise map that everyone can live with and that is a fair map? I think Republican people, for the most part, I think there were people of good faith, but I think in their mind, they're like, how do I maximize the advantage for my side? And, you could say that's politics. That's how people are supposed to approach things. But this is the fundamental mismatch. And I don't know how you fix it other than a nationwide fix to gerrymandering, which I think makes sense. It's just, how are you actually going to get that passed? So anyways, a lot of stuff going on. I think in the short term, Virginia can't change its constitution, but I do think maybe there could be some long-term thinking about a 2028 amendment.
Yeah, and I will say the Supreme Court thing, and my biggest concern, and it always was even before it got passed, is if redistricting becomes such a big issue, which it looks like it is, that our Supreme Court becomes even that more political. Right now, I have feelings about whether it's conservative leaning or Democratic leaning, all that kind of stuff, but it's more grounded in a kind of factual opinions and actual opinions and case law about cases I'm dealing with, not pure politics. I think as we become more polarized, I do worry that Republicans are going to realize that, we need to focus on getting more people picked to the Virginia Supreme Court purely for political reasons, which I don't think is happening right now. But I don't know. It worries. Let me ask you this, as I'm sitting here thinking, what one alternative could be, and maybe this defeats the whole purpose, is maybe you have an extra seat on the commission, and whoever wins that last year gets an extra seat and as a tiebreaker. Maybe that's not workable, and maybe that defeats the whole purpose. But what do you think about something like that?
I mean, I think you definitely need a tiebreaker. Typically in other states, you have, let's say, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and then you have 5 independents who are not associated with either party. And the problem there is, Republicans complain, like in California, you can game the commission and put on people who are really Democrats and independents. So you're never going to have this perfect structure, but you cannot have a commission that is 50-50 either party. And you cannot have a commission that requires a supermajority if you're really trying to get anything done, because that's just never going to happen. And I guess the last thing I should say is your point to the Virginia Supreme Court. I mean, I do think the Virginia Supreme Court, thankfully, is not political. I think it's little c conservative from a legal standpoint, but is not politically conservative. And I think that saved redistricting in 2021. The maps, I have my quibbles with them, but I don't think it was a total disaster. I think the question becomes, as you know, the problem is if in 2031 or in the future, the Virginia Supreme Court starts to get more, political. What does that mean for the redistricting commission? So.
And by the way, I did not mean for anybody considering applying for the redistricting commission to discourage them. Maybe I just didn't have the temperament, but I do think that the foundational reason why Democrats chose to approve it, I do support. But again, like anything in practice, does it change things? I don't know, and all that. But let me see. Can I ask you one question, and you can say I'm going to plead the fifth on it?
Sure.
The Epstein files, do they matter? Do you see it having any impact? Does it matter to Trump?
The Epstein files are funny because I think Democrats for a long time kind of viewed it as this conspiracy and like, why would anyone care about this? I think there are a group of voters out there who they care about the Epstein files in the sense of it shows who is really focused on fighting for average Americans. And I think Trump actually never personally talked a lot about the Epstein files. It was a lot of his people. And so there's this whole thing about Trump is more open. He's going to release the Epstein files. So I think there is this group of voters where it's a really important issue. And to the fact that the Democrats are pushing him on it, it's more about telling those voters, like, look, Trump might not be behind you, might be more behind you. And we might be fighting more for the little guy, the powerful people are being protected. And, you know, I'm not pretending this is 50% of the electorate, but if it's like 1-2%, I mean, some of these districts, some of these states, I mean, small swings can make a big difference. So I think, and anytime you have an issue that is starting to divide a party, I mean, it's good to push on that if you're the opposition, because I think there's some hardcore Trump people who just don't care about Epstein. I mean, they don't know why it's being talked about because Trump said it's over. And then there are these soft MAGA people, I would say, who supported Trump, but they are not necessarily hardcore Trumpers who really do care about this issue. And it's interesting. I don't know if it'll lead to them voting for Democrats, but I think you could see them potentially sit out future elections. You could see them vote third party because they're disillusioned with the Republicans. So I do think it matters. You know, we'll see what ends up happening. I'm not pretending like this is going to be the issue that decides the Virginia election, but I do think in 2026, some of these seats are going to come down to a few hundred votes here and there. And an issue like this could matter in, you know, the midterms.
Well, look, I appreciate that. And I've said this before for anybody that cared to listen. I do think that Democrats should be pushing to listen to what victims are saying. Do they want the reports released or not? I mean, if they don't, then I understand that. But I'm seeing a lot of pushback from my conservative friends saying, oh, well, Democrats they're just using this. They don't actually care about victims. And I just don't agree with that. And obviously I personally have concern about Trump. I don't know if he's on the list or not. I'm kind of skeptical, but as he's refusing to release it, now you see all these weird behaviors with Maxwell. I don't know. I think that we need to keep hammering there and for victims specifically. And if you start hearing them coming out in big numbers saying they don't want to release, then I'd listen to that as well. But anyway, Sam, look, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else you wanted to say that we didn't get into? We've been on it for about an hour and 15, so I don't want to take any more time than
No, I appreciate you having me on. I thought it was an interesting discussion. You know, obviously feel free to listen to my podcast as well, Federal Fallout, if anyone is interested in this stuff.
Yeah. And again, I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Sam is a brilliant dude. I keep telling you need to charge for what you're doing. But keep up the good work, man. It's a public service to us all and really appreciate the time. Okay.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, man.